Hey, Geekscapists, welcome to a brand new Geekscape podcast. I'm Jonathan London, your host. And if this is your first Geekscape, well, you've picked a really good one. We usually talk pop culture basically every week. I've been doing this show for 15 years, talking pop culture. That's what I love. It's the language that I speak. And we talk things like movies, video games, comic books, TV shows. This episode, though, we've got a fantastic one for you. We're talking music, and we've had tons of music episodes before. But I want to tell you that the band that I've got here, I've got Jamie and Rory from the Stereo joining me, and there would be no Geekscape without them. Back in the summer of 1999, I was just a college radio DJ. I did a little show on WXPN Philadelphia, and Jamie and Rory had just put this album out, their first album from the Stereo, and they played my college radio show. So this is a reunion of sorts you're going to experience here on Geekscape because they're about to put out their fourth album, 13, and we'll talk all about how you can help bring that to fruition. They got a Kickstarter going. We'll really get into it, okay? There's tons of homework to do. But again, if you're a regular Geekscapist, you know what to expect. We love talking to pop culture artists and creators. I got to tell you, there have been a lot of y'all recently. We've been doing great on the charts. The podcast is healthier than it's ever been, which is crazy because I feel like we're the kind of one of the older podcasts, 15 years. But I looked at the numbers. We are currently in film interview podcasts, which is the majority of what we do here, number 37 in India. That's right. If you're one of our Indian listeners, thank you. Number 10 in Albania. And yeah, we're in the top 100 here in the US, but I got to look out for this global takeover we're planning. And here's the one that I really enjoyed when I looked at it on the charts about an hour ago. Geekscape, this show you're listening to right now, currently number 9 in Senegal. So, hey, I'm just going to go ahead and say, is it Senegalese listeners? We salute you. If this is your first Geekscape, we got tons of stuff on the feed that you can enjoy. We just did a Book of Boba Fett wrap-up episode where Ian and I talked about all those 7 episodes of that first season and what we thought. That's there if you search the feed. And then before that, I sat down with my good buddy Jonah Tullis. He did this movie on the GameStop stock crazy thing that happened. Remember last year when all those kids became millionaires off of buying a ton of GameStop stock? He had my friend Blake Harris, who did Console Wars, the Sega versus Nintendo documentary and book. They put this documentary together in like a year called GameStop Rise of the Players, and that is out in theaters, and the podcast is right there on the feed. And we're going to be talking to the Stereo today, but if you like it, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast on any podcatcher. We're free. Maybe you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, or on my Twitter, I think. Oh no, maybe you're on my LinkedIn and you're like, I was submitting resumes, and then I was like, maybe I'll watch this show. Who knows? I'm just glad you're here. But the episode after this, we're going to be talking all about that Peacemaker finale that happened this week. I love that Peacemaker show. Don't let the internet ruin it for you. There's some really cool things that happen in that final episode. It's a ton of fun. And previous Geekscape guest, James Gunn, we're super proud of him because, damn, he's just skyrocketed since we had him on the show way back when. I think we had him on for Slither, or the one where Dwight from The Office is a superhero. I think it's just called Super. And he's like beating people up. So we love James, and Peacemaker's fantastic. So subscribe and you'll hear what Ian and I have to say about that. All right. There's just a ton of pop culture stuff to talk about, and we'll be back to talk about it in future episodes. I got Rory and Jamie waiting for me. So let's go ahead and play the theme song and get to it. This is Geekscape. We love you. Awesome. That was our Geekscape theme song done for us by the folks in Punchline. There is a connection to the episode we're doing right now because if you're a Stereo fan, you know that Jamie of the Stereo is also a producer, and he produced the Punchline album. I think he did Just Say Yes, which that's the album they were recording right around the time they made us this theme song. In the comment section, we got a little bit of a praise here from one of our Facebook viewers, and then my regular co-host Katie, who's not on this episode, but she'll be back because I love Katie, and she's just funny, and I like having her on the show because it gives me like a hostage audience to tell stupid jokes to. Katie says Rick and roll. Okay, Katie, we'll explain that one on a future episode, but let's not delay. We got Rory and Jamie here from the Stereo. Let's bring them on in, and there they are. I haven't seen you boys in a long time.
Hyped by that theme song, man. Real hyped. Loving it.
Yeah, they did a pretty, I mean, Steve was just kind of like, so what's the show about? I said, well, it's like pop culture. What do you got? And I gave him like a few words, and that's what they came back with. John Bellin was in the, I think that's actually John Bellin, like doing that singing.
It absolutely, I've actually not heard that, but I was, as it was playing, I was like, that's gotta be Bellin.
Yeah,
because I've recorded a couple of Punchline records. The first one had Bellin in the band, and then I did a couple of records for his other band, Gene the Werewolf. So I'm quite familiar with his crazy voice. You know,
Gene the Werewolf's awesome, and Geekscape is, if you're not familiar, like it's the kind of band that where you're like, okay, I would hear this in like a trucker bar, this kind of music. Like it's really like guitar crunch stuff. And I think he played with like Ted Nugent or something like that. Like that's the kind of audience that's Gene the Werewolf, which is kind of awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
But let's talk about you guys. The Stereo. So Jamie, you and I haven't seen each other in a while. Rory and I have a longer history because we both grew up in Austin. When Rory and I were both in high school, he had this band, The Impossibles, and I got to tell you, we'd see this band in rec centers every weekend, and they were.
I didn't know that about you guys.
Yeah.
Did you guys go? You guys went to high school together?
No, you went to what high school? I was at Westlake.
No, I just hung out in the parking lot of the high school.
Don't you lie to me.
Yeah, he was the guy that was leaning against his Camaro.
There were not, Westlake was like a good neighborhood, and there were a lot like there were a lot of punk kids at Westlake.
Did not go to Westlake.
And I just remember I would always hang out at like Sound Exchange. Here's the thing, Geekscapists. If you're a longtime Geekscapist, you know a lot of Jonathan's history. But when my dad divorced, he moved back to the Barton Hills house, which was like where I was born. And I would always hang out at this place called The Drag by University of Texas. And they had a record shop. And that's where I discovered my first Green Day album, Kerplunk, because it looked like a comic book cover with a girl on it. And that, of course, leads you to like Maximum Rock and Roll and the different Lookout bands and stuff like that. And I was like, maybe there are local bands like that here. And Rory was in a few. He was in the Impossibles, and they were the band, I think, for that scene. Wouldn't you say, Rory?
At the time that you're characterizing, I think more Gals Panic was like the like foot touch point and the thing that was like blowing up. Yeah. But the Impossibles, I just heard were definitely born out of the wake of Gals Panic and like that explosion.
Sent the Gals Panic stuff and the Missile Command stuff that Germ Pollitt did to
I played bass on it.
Yeah, Matt Kelly runs the Geekscape network. If you know, we've got 20 shows on this damn thing now, and Matt is the one who's in charge of them. And I just sent him a bunch of Germs music. It was like, hey, I just remembered this stuff. You got to listen to this. It's totally up your alley. But yeah, like that was like when the ska stuff was picking up, and the bands like Less Than Jake, who've been on the show before, and the Real Big Fish guys, who I have a history with, like that stuff was big in the 90s, and the Impossibles kind of came out of that. Meanwhile, up the I-35 in Minneapolis, I think, Jamie, you were doing Animal Chin.
Yeah, and impressive with your U.S. interstate knowledge.
I get it from the Kepi Ghoulie song about the interstates.
No, it's funny. We talk. My wife and I talk all the time about how I could probably drive the U.S. like, for weeks at a time and not need a map, at least just to get to major cities, because after the amount of Rory and I come from an era of touring where it was the Atlas. There were no iPhones, there were no GPS, anything like that. So anytime somebody just like drops like an interstate in a conversation, you're like, I kind of have like an eyebrow raising, like, all right. This is real people. That's real America right there.
Our people used to navigate by the stars. Why do we need these devices? Set your sails by the moon. Like, I don't fucking know what I'm saying anymore. But the Animal Chin was a band that I didn't get into until Rory was already on Fueled by Ramen. We've had the guy who started Fueled by Ramen, Vinny, on this podcast before. Mm-hmm. then they start putting out these comps, and I really miss compilation albums because that's how I discovered the other bands like Punchline that were on the label with you, Animal Chin, which you were a member of. What was it? I mean, at that point, like the Impossibles were kind of winding down, Rory, right? Like things.
Oh yeah,
I don't know. Yeah. I don't really know what was going on, but y'all were one of the biggest like indie bands in Austin. Y'all, I just remember like seeing y'all at Liberty Lunch and being like, whoa, they sell this place out now, and they used to be in a rec center down the street. Like these guys are going to be huge, but sometimes that hurts the band.
I don't know if it hurt us to be that popular in Austin, but it was just like, to your point, it got wild. Like we were, a really big local band, and just we all simultaneously hit that point of like adulthood is setting in, and you got to figure out what's next and what's the next step. And so, college becomes important for some people, and you've got this kind of sense of like, well, this is great for now, but we got to grow up. I didn't want to grow up. I just wanted to keep making music and keep being in bands and doing stuff like that. And so after a few false starts, me and Jamie were brought together by John Janik. You mentioned Video Fiorello starting Fueled by Ramen. He co-founded it with John Janik. And John at the label had both of our kind of demos that we were putting together, and Jamie was pretty far along and starting to almost get to the point of putting out a solo record, but John saw that it could all come together. And so that idea, planted a seed with us, it grew. And then the next thing you know, Jamie's, driving 12 hours down I-35 from Minneapolis to Austin.
Second mention of Interstate 35 on this. It's only been like 10 minutes.
We need to educate the viewers, right? Like, the listeners need to be like, oh, that is this is a geography lesson. I think I think this is valuable.
And next thing you know, we were putting together a record, and looking back at it now, I mean, so obviously we're here talking about a new album that the Stereo is doing and a podcast and stuff. We've been working on that stuff for years, literally, like exchanging demos and working on music and stuff. We put out that first record from the time that Jamie drove to Austin until the record was out and we were touring. It was like 6 months, like maybe. Wow.
I don't even think it was that long. I honestly think it was like 3.
You didn't have like, 2 other members in the
band. I wasn't in
like,
Austin.
When we started.
No,
you guys are doing all the instruments, like.
Yeah, well, so when like the one, it's hard to remember that every detail of what was going on back then, but I remember we were talking. We had a phone call, and then there was like some sort of like Rory's I'm gonna send you this cassette that I have that and at that point that was
Dropbox. There's no Dropbox
like,
going on.
I remember waiting for some cassette, and to be honest, I don't know if it ever arrived. I don't know if you sent it or not, or what the deal was. But then we had a second phone call, and it was sort of like, okay, well, I'm sure it's gonna be great. You're Rory. I love Rory songs. I love you, Rory. Like, this is going to be great. I'll just tell you what, I'll just like pack my bag and I'll be over there in about 18 hours. Okay. Sound good? And he's like, yeah, see you in about 18 hours. And like, I woke up the next morning and I just drove to Austin with all my stuff that I needed. And I was there probably something about 10 days, 14 days. I can't remember. I just slept on your couch, Rory. And every day we would just write a little bit and we would eat a lot of Kim Fung. Yep. I mean, and probably an unhealthy amount, God, that number, was it number 53? Man, I don't know.
Missed it. Yeah.
So good. Anyway, but we just every day we'd get up and just sort of, okay, what's the idea to work on today? And we put together the whole everything right there in like 10 days, and then went back to Minneapolis, recorded it up in Minneapolis. And then it wasn't more than maybe a couple of weeks after Rory went back to Austin that we and the new guys went back down to Austin, and days later started playing shows, started a tour. I mean, I'm not sure what the reason was to try to be so quick about it. Maybe it was just we had nothing else to do. So obviously let's just get this rolling, but no, it was like light speed, that we from the moment of like, okay, let's do this to okay, we're on a month-long tour now, you know.
Yeah,
it would never happen like that nowadays.
You didn't even realize. Yeah, you don't even realize how the pressure that you're putting on yourselves as musicians or as human beings in that truncated a window for putting that kind of thing together. And there's got to be pressure from the label too. I remember around that era we had the drive-through bands and they all had an upstream deal with MCA, so there was that pressure to be like, oh, Newfound Glory just got upstreamed, Midtown's next, just got upstreamed. And you started seeing a lot of money in the scene at that time, right? Like Less Than Jake was on Capitol. I'm sure Vinny was telling you what that experience was. They had some of their videos getting on MTV too. There was a lot of money.
We were not immune to that probing.
Right.
You know, like when we were cutting the record in that basement in Minneapolis, you know, we had like Interscope and Capitol's like FedEx numbers. They gave them to us and they're like, send us like your dailies, you know? So we'd like make rough mixes and we'd send them over and stuff like that. And they're wanting to have labels like that were trying to have relationships with weird young bands like us that had the potential to do something. And well, not, you know, once you listen to the podcast, you see how it all unfolds or whatever, but it was just wild. Like we would be, if you could see what it is that we were doing at that moment, and then, you know, have these conversations with our label guy, John Janik, about like, okay, let's send what we're doing in this dingy ass basement on a CD to these, you know, fat cats in Hollywood. Like it just blew our minds. We're like, because I mean, it was terrible. It was winter in Minneapolis. We were in this basement with this guy who was a recording engineer. He had a cat litter box down there. It was like there was like maybe a lamp and like one sort of Sealy mounted light bulb, and it was pretty. And it was cold. It was very dismal. Grim. Yeah, and we're down there with our emo haircuts, just like, you know, inventing emo. So.
But when you listen to that record 300, you know, I don't think you get any of the vibes of
not at
surroundings all in it. Like it has
not at all
very like poppy, polished kind of feel to it, a lot of energy, where we're just kind of sitting in the dark, you know, trying to see the fretboard of the bass.
Right. There wasn't any, and as we sort of talked about earlier, there's no time to do anything else but then get it down and move along. You know, we must have obviously been booking the tour that we were about to go on in a few weeks while we were making the record. So like we had to go, you know.
You didn't have time to think about this stuff.
There's no time.
It was like decision. And I do love that album. I love the work that y'all have each done since, but that album feels like there's a polarity to it. There's the Jamie songs and there's the Rory songs. There's the songs that it feels like Jamie was writing for the post Animal Chin solo album, and there's the songs that Rory was writing for a post Impossibles project. And he was writing, and y'all are both writing about those experiences. This is a marriage kind of album, and it does feel like a ping pong match between your sounds.
It's funny, there's a song called and I can't remember what the order is, but at the time I remember, and we called it like the Impossible song and the Animal Chin song.
Oh no.
And the Impossible song was You Can't Go Home Again,
which is about the Impossibles.
It was about the breakup of the Impossibles. Sure. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rory.
No, that's right.
It's been a while. And then Count Me Out, which is also about the breakup of Animal Chin a little bit. So, and we put them side by side on the record, and probably laziness. I don't know. You know what I mean? But there was a little bit of that, you know, these are the Rory jams. These are the Jamie jams, and we're going to just slap them together. But there was also a lot of co-writing too. You know, there were songs where I sang that I didn't write the song. And then there were things like parts of other songs that maybe I wrote. Like I can't remember precisely, but I feel like the chorus to "You Got Some Nerve" probably came from Rory. Something like that.
Wow, I hope so. I love that.
Well, you got half the rights of it. You might as well, you know, take it, right?
The one credit that I remember being really proud of was the bass line on "Please Try to Understand." Right? Is that the name of that song?
Yeah. Why not?
Right?
Sure. Is that you playing?
Maybe. That's me playing, and I wrote that bass line.
There was nobody else there.
There's one
well,
of two people.
Jonathan, there was no lights in the studio. I don't know, like was Steven plugged in? You know?
What's amazing about this Geekscape and you're listening, maybe you're not familiar with the band, and you're a longtime Geekscapist, and what's crazy about this is they do throw this album out there. They do tour that summer. They did play my radio show, and they did a whole East Coast tour. I remember going to the Long Beach show, y'all with Slow Gherkin, I believe.
Yeah.
And that was a band on Asian Man Records. Mike Park's been on the show, Geekscapist. You have to go back a few years to hear that one. But while y'all are putting this music out, it's not a vacuum. Like this, it's an influential indie label, and people like Chris Carrabba of Dashboard Confessional are hearing it. Patrick Stump, who becomes a label mate with Fall Out Boy, is listening to it. Jack Antonoff, who we've interviewed on the show, is listening, and he's now like the Bleachers thing is huge, and he goes on to write for Taylor Swift, and they're like BFFs. The people who are being influenced by that first album and the continued music that both of you put out, like it's just incredible. And I didn't really think that there were too many people that were huge. Like I was like, you knew that this is what I knew that people were like that had gone outside. I was shooting a Bayside video in 2003 using film equipment from my film school in New York, and Anthony, I think I was wearing an Impossible shirt, and Anthony goes, "The Impossible is the best band on Fueled By Ramen. I love that band." And I was like, "You heard of them?" and he just professes his love for the Impossibles. We profess our love for the Stereo.
I wish I had known that. I would have interviewed Anthony for the podcast. Yeah,
we'll connect you. But I just you start to get the feeling that in the years that followed that album 300 and then the subsequent Stereo albums, I mean, I remember rumblings from other bands that Patrick Stump owed a lot of his vocal stylings when Fall Out Boy went big to this Mr. Jamie Woolford we got right here on Geekscape. Were y'all cognizant of that influence when you were doing this?
I just want to say really quick, Patrick says that too. It's not just something that people say about him. Patrick is super gracious, and by the way, like a ultra talent, just an amazing artist. And so
I saw them on that Green Day tour like a few months ago on that Mega Hella whatever that thing. Yeah. Their live show is psychotic. It's like Pete comes out with one of the Kiss flamethrower basses and stuff like that. Like amazing. It was incredible.
They're amazing. So to have any sort of tangential connection to any of that stuff is amazing. But I do think that that's part of the band's legacy, is that the Stereo was always a band's band. It was a band that other bands would cite and were into, but as far as connecting with like a fan base and actually being able to find that sort of connection outside of other artists, it never really happened. It's really like a big part of the story for me, and a big part of what we did this 5-part podcast called Kings of No Hope. Thank you. What it's about is a lot of that sense of this band did sort of change things, maybe in a small way, but because it was a small way for people that would influence the next sort of generation of rock music, it echoed larger than the actual like impact it made at the time. Which is,
wow, that's very poetic. You should do this. You should like do this for a living.
You ever written songs?
Yeah, you should. Have you thought about songwriting?
And Geekscape is what those of you who are listening, what Rory's talking about is they have this new 5-6 part kind of like documentary podcast series that launches this week called Kings of No Hope, and it's kind of like a facetious reference to the band's history, and they stayed hopeful. They're the kings of it, but like we said, that the band ran its course. Was in those iterations, the band is back. But go to kingsofnohope.com, and there's this Rory and Jamie have been working on this podcast series where they have people like Patrick Stump and Chris Carrabba and these big musicians talking about how influential the Stereo was on them. And how was that putting together kind of a autobiographical magazine style podcast talking about your history of the band and how big the influence has been?
Well, I think the best part about it is that it didn't have to be autobiographical in whole, because we haven't gotten to it yet, but Jamie kicked me out of the stereo. We talked about Jonathan was talking about the intense pressure and, how we were driving.
I was getting to that. Yeah.
Yeah. And what that eventually resulted in was my ouster from the band. So there is that period where I'm right there with Jamie and we're basically telling the story together. But then there's a point where it hands off. And where that was so fascinating for me is that I knew a lot of the drama and the stories and the things that were going on around the band, and like, oh, they're just about to make it. You were talking about upstreaming bands into major labels, and it just seemed like after me getting kicked out, that was the next logical step. It was almost like a foregone conclusion.
It's why they kicked you out. It's what the labels demanded. Yeah. The rock gods demanded a sacrifice, and it was you.
Understandable, but it didn't ever get there. And so that it was so fascinating to me, because I knew that the band was influential. I knew that they were a band's band. And I knew that they had these like opportunities, and they were going to Europe and they were going to Japan, and it just seemed like it was about to go, and it never did. So in the podcast, I get to find out from Jamie and from all the other members of the band, what that whole experience was like, and what going through it and living through it looked like. It was fascinating for me, and hopefully will be fascinating for anybody who listens to it, whether you know the band or not, because it's really more about just the story and the drama that surrounded the band.
I can't wait to listen to this podcast. I have it, and
I gotta say, like, it really starts to take off. Like episode 2, episode 1 is sort of just like the groundwork.
Okay.
Like, who is this band, right? Why would you care to listen to this, right? And so that's where you have like all the,
Patrick Stump is vouching for us. Patrick Stump says that we're important. Right. Please listen to the rest of the story.
Hang tight to the first episode. Right. We're getting there, and then the second episode is the one.
Yeah. So like one thing I want to say is, like when Rory came up with this idea about doing, the podcast, and it's funny, my memory of this is even probably less intact than anything, but I remember we talked about, how these types of things are often a sort of like a congratulatory pat on the back. Aren't we awesome? Check out how, enough about me. What do you guys think about me? Whole approach to like, a band documentary, right?
Sure.
And our band, while we weren't like, we're not Motley Crue or No Effects and those stories, like, Keith Richards shooting.
You haven't OD'd, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah. Nobody's, as far as I know, no one in the band ever like, injected heroin into their eyes or something like that. You know what I mean? Like nothing like that happened. Right. We're sort of just normal guys, young guys trying to get our way into the music business somehow and just make a living at doing something that we all loved. But through that and through, as it's almost like sort of like fated to happen, things are going to go wrong, right? Being in a band is actually kind of hard work. It's definitely not like what you see on TV, and you talk to anybody in the world and ask them like, oh, what do you think it would be like to be in a band? And unless you're in a band, your answer is probably tons of money and partying and whatever, right? Like, and it's not that at all. It's actually like a tremendous amount of waiting. It's a tremendous amount of driving. It's a tremendous amount of, okay, well, yeah. How much money?
People just ghosting.
There's more.
I think
there's more
I'm
money.
comparing it to Hollywood. In my experiences, I'm comparing it to Hollywood. That's my comparable. Is the Hollywood thing.
Oh yeah, there's some ghost stories.
I had a producer this week who said, "Hey, we love the package. We were really impressed by you. We're really impressed by your attachments because we have a few actors attached. They're like, this all looks great. Why don't you just go make it?" Okay.
Well, that's what we ended up doing with our record.
Yeah,
right.
Precisely. But just to kind of finish my thought, like Rory had the sort of the foresight to like not make the pat on the back version of this, right? Where we're the heroes. I even said like, look, there's a lot about this story. Like if you take my whole personality and my sentiment out of it. Like there's a lot of stuff about this that I'm not proud of, that happened in our band. And if we want to tell a compelling story about what happened with our band, we actually kind of have to tell the truth. And the truth isn't not every single day in the band of the stereo that was the truth a pretty thing to hear, but people like a story that has heroes and villains. And this has a lot of that. I've said on different podcasts that everyone in this band goes under the bus, at least for a little bit in the podcast. And it's a good listen. Everything it really is, especially the conversations that Rory and I have, we've obviously since, buried the hatchet a long time ago, but part of that burying the hatchet actually happens during the podcast interviews.
Yeah.
We actually on purpose saved talking about some of the really tender stuff between each other. We waited until it was like, okay, mics are rolling. Let's have this conversation, even though we know people are going to hear it, So it makes for sort of like a lean forward listen. You're like, oh my God, they're really like, they're having this moment right now. Episode 2, it really starts to go,
But documenting it almost feels like there's no turning back now. And I think
it's done now.
Geekscape, we want you to, I really want y'all to subscribe to this. Oh, there's the siren. That means Matt Kelly just added the 83rd show to the podcast network. Fantastic, Matt. Way to go. We're not crumbling under our own weight at all. So just keep adding those podcasts. We have tons of podcasts here on the network. If you're new, we got music, we got pro wrestling, we got video games, whatever you got, search for Geekscape. But this whole thing, like, I've known Rory for a while. We weren't necessarily close or anything, but you go to the same scene, you kind of know what the person's about. You listen to their songs and their words in your head for years of your life. You kind of know what they're about. And then I saw y'all in the summer of '99 play my radio show. And then it's not shortly thereafter that Rory's not in the band. And I don't think I villainized you, Jamie. I saw you the following summer when you were out with Midtown on that tour. And as a fan, I just kind of trying like, hey, I'm trying to keep neutral. Man, and by that time, I think
not everybody did.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like I think that you had been villainized, right? And I think that
me or Rory.
I think Jamie, if you're the music, I think you're particular about what you want, and you continued on with the band. So when somebody sees somebody ousted, I think the general view of it is, well, if the guy stayed with the band, he's like, Rory was the one that was the victim, as he's out in the street, right? And you stay, you know what I mean? Like, he has to go put the Impossibles back together. I do like that you put the Impossibles back together. I love that album, but because you stayed with the band and continued on for 2 more albums, I think naturally people were like, oh, he dicked them over. And Rory, did you feel that you were like, hey, I invested all this stuff in an acute amount of time. I put my heart and soul into this thing. It looked like we were going in promising places. Now I have to watch for the bleachers as other people get to eat my lunch. Like, how long? But I mean, how long did you
hey, thanks, Jonathan. Thanks. Yeah.
No.
Wait,
I love it.
Go ahead.
I'm loving this.
Kicking up the dust again. Thanks, Jonathan.
Geekscape, you can hear the whole thing on the Kings of No Help podcast. Well, all I want to say is that was 20 plus years ago. Y'all were kids. I've been in those experiences. When I was in my early 20s, unlike you guys, I don't talk to those people again. I have not repaired those friendships. I have been like, F it. There's a bunch of people in this world. I'll carry on with people who actually want to be a part of it. How did y'all start to repair it? Not to put spoilers on the podcast, because I want people to go and download the podcast. But Rory, how did you have to come about? Like, Jamie, what truths did you have to face where y'all could put space together, give each other space to be back in each other's lives? Because I remember seeing you on stage, Rory, and being like, whoa, how did they get back together? That felt like it was burned to the ground.
I think there was always respect, even so, like you mentioned.
I was just going to say that I never lost any respect for Rory as an artist. Not once. Never. Yeah. I might have been pissed at him for XYZ or whatever on tour, yelling at me, know,
ate my chips.
No spoilers.
Just kidding.
Oh, it's not chips.
I know.
You know what I mean?
It's he'll use my underwear. I know it gets nasty. Who else do? I'm kidding.
So you gotta
subscribe for the truth. You have to subscribe for the truth, Geekscape.
We had mutual respect still, and we were still had like a working relationship too, because we were still both on Fueled by Ramen. Yeah. So there were crossovers, and we ultimately ended up playing some shows in Florida together, and I went on stage and played with the band. So I think even back then we made efforts to try and squash it as from any sort of like big beef that was going to keep us from being able to tour together. Coexist is a good way to put it. But because we did have that sort of mutual respect for music, I think that made it more intriguing as the years went on, where like Jamie's putting out a solo record and I'm doing a record. I had a band called The Artificial Heart. And so we're like hearing each other's stuff and talking about it. And by the way, Jamie is a fantastic songwriter, a fantastic artist, but also an amazing producer who I have always been envious of, and who I wanted to work with. And so, over the years there would be opportunities to be able to do that as well. And so that connection, there was always still some connective tissue there. Maybe we weren't, on the precipice of making more music together, songwriting together, but we were still, pretty consistently in contact.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I actually designed the Impossibles record after the stereo. A couple and an EP maybe too, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
The comeback.
It's in the hard drives up there.
No, the last one that we did with the stencil cover.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie.
Didn't I do it? Didn't I do Return? Didn't I design that?
That's Return, not Comeback. Return, yeah.
Yeah, Jamie did Return as well. But I think we were still probably, on Return, there's a song called Hey You Kids, where one of the lines is turn off the stereo. And that wasn't on accident. That was like it was sort of like a fun little jab. And I think that sort of thing.
For you, Jamie, when you heard that, was it fun for you?
I mean, I don't think
have we talked about that?
No.
I would have been fucking pissed, like straight up. Like I'm like what, a 22, 23, 24-year-old kid. Everything's still pretty fresh.
That's it.
Cancel the Kickstarter.
I would have been pissed. Well, no, I mean, I want to continue to acknowledge this shit was 20 years ago and y'all were kids, but like the mud is slinging.
I mean, come on, whatever. Look, I probably had a view even back then that, and maybe I didn't publicly demonstrate this, but I probably in my head and in my heart thought to myself, I should have handled that a lot better than I did back then.
I don't think we have tools at that age, is what I want to say.
No, we don't.
I don't think we have the tools until we're our age, and then we don't have the hair.
Have you?
But
anybody has anyone here been on a road trip, right, with your friends, right?
So you're thrown together in 6 months of being in a dank basement.
But even just like, hey man, let's drive to the coast or whatever, right? Wherever you live. And like after like 10 hours with anyone, right? There's, usually people that are sort of like, mid-20s, young 20s, whatever. There are things that get on your nerve real fast. Somebody sets like a cup down and then like of soda half empty, and then they take the lid off and then they don't throw it away or something. You're like, what's going on? You just want to
that's not even a road trip. You just described like a marriage.
Right. But I mean, now imagine like 4 guys or more, right? Sometimes in this like big box on wheels going around like this every day for like essentially years. Mm-hmm. And you're not, like you're saying, you're not equipped to manage and process things that go on between people like that. And then there are various degrees of maturity. There are various degrees of accountability and various degrees of hygiene. There's a lot
that felt pointed.
Yeah.
Well, but Jamie, when
hygiene, if you know what I'm saying.
Hi, Gene. How are you?
I mean, I see you the next year, 2000. In 2000, you had the new Tokyo EP out, and then you go on to put 2 more albums, those lineups didn't stay totally consistent either. At this point,
it's like
it is Jamie's
Spinal
band.
Tap. It's Spinal Tap.
But you are, the stereo is you. And was it My Way or the Highway? Like, what was it like in those next 3 releases? And you can go as far as you want with this. I love you, and again, like, y'all were kids when you were making the decisions.
Yeah.
What lessons were you learning about yourself, about your ability to create, about your ability to collaborate with other people? What were you learning in those places where there's a revolving door lineup, et cetera, et cetera?
You're learning what not to do. I mean, as simple of an answer as that may be, and maybe that sounds silly, but it is true. I mean, anything that you do in life at a professional level, if you do it more than once, any artistry, right? You do a thing, you release it publicly, you learn from that, and then the next time you go and like, I'm not going to do how I did it that time because that aspect of it there irked me and whatever. But people can't really be treated like that in some ways. But also, when you're working with people in a creative way, and there's an intention to share it with the public, or just even just to have it at the end of the day, I think that it's important that you bring an A game, right? If you're, and when I talk about accountability, right? Like we go to our, like you go to a job, if you're just sort of showing up and collecting the paycheck and you give off that sort of that attitude, you're not going to last very long at that job, right? And as much as being in a band is more poetic and romantic and whatever, and supposed to be fun and this, that, and the other, there's work to be done, right? Albums don't just get like downloaded and then like handed to the band then to send off to the label, right?
It took 6 months.
Somebody has to pick up a guitar and start and write down some words and start figuring these things out and make a record out of it, right? Somebody's got to do that. And if you come into that situation with sort of like this is a ride that I've paid, that I'm my presence is my ticket, and I want to just ride through it and have fun and have a good time, I don't think that's a good way to do anything, right? And I'm not saying everybody that kind of went through the stereo system was like that, but that at times there was a lot of sort of just reliance on the powers that be to do it for me. And because I was so relentlessly ambitious, I think I just chose to accept that and go, well, if I'm going to be the Svengali of the band, well, then I'm not going to apologize for it, because shit needs to get done, and I'm just going to get it done, and then we can just go do this thing.
Object,
and so it's unfortunately it's sort of like a self propagating system, right?
Prophecy.
Yeah, self-fulfilling prophecy. Where
you had 2 more albums, you had the EP, 2 more albums, and then you run out of road when you're a solo. When you're doing that, because your support network had been stripped away. Am I being accurate here? I'm just assuming at this point. I'm just kind of following the thread.
Yeah, no, so the band had the final lineup of the stereo, which was essentially myself, Chris Serafini,
I know Chris,
who's in the band now, and our drummer BJ Willett. We were sort of like crystallized as like this is the lineup that you see on Rewind and Record, the last stereo record, was sort of like the not crucified in the crucible is what I was just saying. Calcified. We'll go with that. Sir. It's a little bit of crucifixion. Crystallized. Any verb, adjective, whatever that you prefer.
It's all calcification, I think.
Right. That had solidified as like, this is the band, the stereo. And we had all the growing pains that unfortunately had happened in the public eye beforehand had been worked out for the most part. There's still, all the stuff that we're talking about earlier about how just difficult it is to be in a band, all that stuff was still going on or whatever. But these 3 guys were like, okay, this is the group that needs to continue. But that doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with beating the fatigue of getting to that 3rd record, going through everything that we had gone through, and then still running into the obstacles that that every band sort of faces when they're trying to make it in the music business. But our obstacles, even though we seem to have a leg up, like Rory would just kind of describe, we're going to Japan, we're going to Europe, we're having meetings with this guy and that guy and whatever. And for some reason, it always seemed like there was this universal karma thing against it, like where crazy stuff would happen that would, it almost seemed pointed at our band, like the East Coast blackout. Do you remember that when the entire Northeast like shut down?
Yeah.
I swear to God, that was to try to ruin the stereo. You know what I mean? Like, had nothing to do with some power plant in Canada that blew up or whatever. It was all about like trying to ruin the stereo show. Yeah, right.
Of course.
So, and there's just these funny moments like this where just like, God, really? Like that had to happen. And like, now we're like set off the course now this way. And after enough of that stuff, you finally just go, God, I don't know if I can just get in another van with these guys and, smell what I'm smelling and read what they're spelling. You know what I mean? So,
and had the music industry shifted, I mean, should you all have started adding a dance band feature to your band? Does that make sense?
Maybe. Why not? Right?
Did music move away from where y'all were at that time? And because you still have your finger on the pulse, you're producing. And did you have to become and now look in Geekscape, I want to talk about this brand new album 13, because I'm really excited about it. It comes out in later this spring, and y'all can go visit it. You just go to thestereorock.com, I believe is the thestereorock.com. You got to put the in there. Go to thestereorock.com and you can order their fourth album, 13. Rory's back on it. And we'll take a look at the Kickstarter that you can do to add some features to the album, things like a live streaming concert, etc. You can get it in multiple vinyl editions, I believe. There's all sorts of cool downloadable stuff that you can get, early access to more podcast episodes. It's all there at thestereorock.com. It'll lead you right to the Kickstarter. Did you have to become a producer to become a band member is one thing that I want to ask you. Did you have to work through the variety of artists to find out?
It's a good question.
How to communicate with artists?
That's an extremely good question. Well
I've
done.
The show before,
it's impressive. Got lower thirds too. It's just
welcome
awesome.
To Geekscape. Every now and then, I like to talk comics.
I would say, I don't think I've ever thought of it so precisely in that fashion, but that's not a I like that.
Yeah.
I kind of like the idea of like that by being a producer, because I've always sort of thought of the producer role as being sort of a temporary band member that was maybe like the older brother, or something like that, like leading the charge, like the guy that had been through the studio process before that can help the band go through a studio process and get a successful result.
But like a film producer or film director, you have to learn.
Every band is different. Every band is different. And I've noticed over the years that like what I might say to one person about how to arrive at a successful either performance or a song idea or whatever it is may not be the exact same thing I say to the next person that is in a similar situation or they're facing a similar obstacle. There are a certain amount of like sort of like truths up and down, like where it's the same for everybody. But there's a lot of nuance most of the time when you're producing artists. People come in with material that is very close to their heart, and imagination is both an amazingly powerful thing, but it's also a huge problem because you can imagine anything, right? In music, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will work when it goes under microphones and
it's not necessarily attainable.
Other instruments, yeah. So some of the times it's just conversation about how I get what you're saying there, but the practicality of the idea probably is not going to break. It'll probably break down once you add in the other three people in the room with us. It doesn't, whatever. And so that having that conversation in different ways over many, many years has probably done a lot for my own personal growth. I would say that's fair, but also just growing up, getting a little older, getting wiser,
getting humbled.
Yeah. You can't be right all the time about everything all the time, right? period. So when you reflect back on things that you've done in your life or just your life, it's all learning. Everything's learning all the time. Everything is, like I said earlier, you kind of go into the next record going, I don't want to do what we did on the first record because it went this way and I wanted to go that way. But life is the same thing. So we get to the point we're at now with the stereo, and Rory does this podcast, and I chose to face it head on. Whereas in the early days, we talk about this in the podcast, like there was always a sort of like a public facing persona that was always sort of a little bit curated just so that we could not talk about the typical drama band stuff that happened. But the podcast doesn't do that. The podcast is like, this is what happened. This is what I said. And this is what I felt about it. And to hell with you.
And here's what this person says about that thing, and here's what that person says about that thing, and they completely conflict, but we're just going to put both stories in.
Yeah, there's
it's
a lot
actually
of
kind
that.
of fascinating.
I mean, there's always a third element, and that element is the listener. That element's the audience. That element's the fan. And I think leaving space for them to interpret your art is what makes that art important. If you over-explain things, you end up with a children's book or a children's album. If you under-explain things, you end up very experimental. But if you find that sweet spot between yourself as an artist and the audience, they bring their life experiences and their relationships. And we've all been where Jamie was and where Rory was. We've been the person who kicked them out. We've been the person who got kicked out. And maybe that we've done that in romantic relationships. Maybe we've done that in professional relationships, etc. Friendships. We have to bring, as listeners, as audience members, we have to bring those to any art and engage in that way in order to inherit that art and make it ours. And y'all are the soundtrack to my teen and post-teen years up until my current 43 years on this planet. And when I found out that y'all have this new album 13, when Rory was like, hey, we got, do you have the old MP3s or files from being on the radio show in 1999? I turned to Rory and I said, I got all of them, baby. I have all of them. Is that a surprise for Jamie?
No, it's not a surprise, Jonathan, because I remember every time that you would play that damn warm-up thing, and I'd be just like, why does he keep playing that thing? God.
Yeah. So yeah, when y'all recorded 8 tracks back in the old radio show, Kevin McCaffrey, who's been on the show, he recorded them for y'all. And when Rory asked for them, I was like, oh, y'all are up to something again. I cannot wait to see what this is. Geekscape is, if you're new to the stereo and you've made it this far into the conversation, I'm so glad that you've invested in learning about the band. And I would love for you to go to kingsofnohope.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can learn a little bit more of the inner goings of what happened and what the future holds, because I think there will be an additional episode after the 5 that have been recorded and cut. Maybe. And I think the best way to find out that there will be, or the best way to ensure that there will be, is I want you to go to this URL, thestereorock.com, and what that'll do is it'll feed you right into the band's currently running Kickstarter campaign. And I've already done my part. I did some Kickstarter. Maybe I'll up my donation. Who knows? Let's see if I win the lotto this year. But I'm going to throw it up on the screen right here. But taking a look at this Kickstarter, it's pretty great. It'll tell you everything you need to know about the new LP. The podcast, they had a goal of $5,000. They blew the doors off of that thing immediately. They're getting close to $30,000, but that doesn't mean they don't want your help, Geekscapists, because what that's going to do is that's going to open you up to all these crazy stretch goals, like doing a studio performance concert for the backers, upgraded versions of the LP, and who knows what the next one that can unlock is. We're just going to grow this thing out.
It's still loading. It looks like, it's like.
Well, I don't think y'all have hit it yet. I don't think
we have not. We have not. And I'll just say, yeah, we had what we considered a very reasonable goal, and people have just been too incredible, too amazing, to the point where we don't even have the new stretch goal up, because we're literally putting it together and trying to figure out how we can give it back to the fans and be able to do something for them. So the fact that it's where it is now, completely incredible. I'd love for more people to get the record, but yeah, it's we're out of campaign mode and now in just awe mode of like, wow, everyone is incredible. Thank you so much. And we hope that you like the new single, which is coming out tomorrow. The song Kings of No Hope is going to be out on all your major platforms, along with the podcast that's coming out as well. So now we're finally getting to give some stuff back to the world, because in the 1 week and a day that this has been running, it's just completely blown away all of our expectations.
And some of the incentives are pretty cool. Geekscape is like, I ordered myself a copy of 13, the new album. I got myself a T-shirt because I haven't had a stereo T-shirt in 20 years. I remember my old stereo T-shirt based on the 300 font. But there's all sorts of additional stuff you can get. Obviously, the vinyl pack. There's a super fan pack that has all these additional tiers. Plus, you get more stuff like a 13 cassette tape, so you get a little retro action going on that. Maybe if Jamie finds it, he'll send you the tape that Rory sent him way back when that he never played. There's all sorts of stuff. You can get a test pressing pack. You can be an honorary producer on the album. There's all sorts of stuff that you can do, so check it out. It's thestereorock.com will feed you right into the Kickstarter. I would love to see a music video, but that's me as a filmmaker wanting to see that kind of stuff. But really put the pressure on the band to make up new incentives by continuing to donate. If they get this thing to 100,000, I think we're going to do it. If you get this thing to 100,000, let's just put the pressure on and be like, what do you do now? What do you do now, tough guy? What do you do with your money now? So there's only one way to put the pressure on them. Just keep donating to these guys.
Yeah. And we're super really excited about the album, like having new music to put out after so long. This album 13, I the way that I kind of talk about it is it's almost the spiritual sequel to 300. 300 was the first album that me and Jamie worked together on for the stereo. 300 is a perfect score in bowling. It's a really nice number to have. It's got this positive connotation to it. 13 is kind of almost looking to celebrate what Jamie was talking about earlier, about the way that the band just couldn't seem to catch a break, and it just felt like everything was stacked against them. It's now we've got this other number that we're associating ourselves with. It's the unlucky number. And then the Kings of No Hope single, this idea of Kings of No Hope, Jonathan, you talked about being a little facetious, but I mean, I think it really is a good characterization of, in retrospect, like how the whole history of the band sort of like feels and being a part of it from the inside. So there is like a kind of a cohesive thread and like a story through all the things that we're doing now. It's not just just sort of thrown together or random.
I love it. In Geekscape, if you're listening on the podcast, file, if you download it from whatever podcatcher you use, I'm going to throw a little bit of the single Kings of No Hope on the back end of this, because I do want you to continue to visit the stereo. I want you to order this album. It's not easy being a kid who's into bands that you don't think anybody had ever heard of. And in college radio, I think there's like something cool about college radio. Be like, oh, I knew about this band and I've known about them since blank or blank blank, and I was the first one to hear about them. That gets, the second your ego wears off and you've taken some hits in life, I would say the age is maybe 24, 25. It stops being cool, not being the only person who's heard of a band. And so I want all of you listening to this to celebrate this band. That's why I bring people like Mike Park and Dr. Frank onto this show, and the folks from Nerve Herder who also have a new single out this week. It's why we have musicians with their podcasts on this network, like Word Burglar, the hip hop, nerdcore rapper from Toronto. It's why we made Geekscape to about these little weird fringe niche, exciting things. This is our currency as geeks. This is who we are as pop culture fanatics. This is what we value. So I really appreciate you guys coming on the show and the Geekscape is listening and kind of just sharing this with them, because if you're not familiar with the stereo, I'd love for you to be, because these two guys right here still are part of the soundtrack to my life. That's heartfelt, folks. Like, for real. Back on the show after 23 years. This is very much the spiritual successor to my college radio show.
Yeah, and we've got a new album for the next several years of your life, and to keep you alive, we'll continue to potentially make more music.
Please do it. It got a little touch and go there in 2014. Little touch and go. So please continue, keep me alive in some way. Also joining us is Gabe Haskell of the Impossibles. I'm kidding, guys. No, Gabe will be in another episode.
Oh my God.
I love Gabe, and I like his music too. I love I love all of it. But yeah, I love celebrating this stuff. But Geekscape is keep listening. You have your mission. You're going to go to thestereorock.com. You're going to throw some money on this incentives. Don't settle until they've agreed to cage fight each other.
Jonathan, you kind of just made it sound like unless we keep going, you might not live. So, I mean,
that might incentivize them to stop donating. Shut the band down. Shut the band down. Kill Jonathan.
I don't know if there's much higher pressure that you could put on us besides, my life depends on it, but no pressure.
I think you just made your last dollar on that Kickstarter. People are going to try and murder me through your music. Guys, any closing words for
on season 2 of Kings of No Hope?
I think that's the incentive is like we hit $1 million and they're going to cage fight Jonathan with cheese graters strapped to their hands.
Wow.
Let's do it. Let's make it bloody. Why not? Take it to the mat. Any closing thoughts? They're going to subscribe to the podcast, Kings of No Hope, on whatever podcatchers are out there. They're going to go ahead and donate money to put you in a cage fight. What else we got?
I just say thanks, Jonathan, for having us on. This has been great to see you again after so long, and really appreciate it.
I love it.
Likewise, I'm so tickled that we got to do this, and thank you. And you've obviously been extraordinarily kind about us and our band and our influence on you and others, and so it's humbling and a real treat for us to hear this stuff. So thank you very much.
Don't take my word for it. Geekscape is you got people like Chris Carrabba, Patrick Stump, and Jack Antonoff saying the same. Go and check out that podcast. You won't be alone in your love for the band. And my fiance Heidi Cox says, "Hey, well, hold up. There will be no killing Jonathan."
Well, there you go. We're good. We're safe.
Let the fans decide. All right. It's not up to us. We're not in control of our lives. All right, Geekscapists, that's it for Geekscape. Find us on any podcast app out there. And if you enjoyed this, go ahead and share it with your friends. They can maybe leave a review. Maybe you could leave a review. I've given up asking for reviews after 15 years. I just like doing the show. And if they have one listener or if I'm number 9 in Senegal, it really doesn't make any difference to me. I'm going to keep talking to y'all. The next podcast up on the feed is going to be Ian and I talking all about I loved it, but James Gunn's Peacemaker on HBO Max. We love that series. And now it's wrapped up, so we can talk about it. We got tons of cool stuff coming up on Geekscape. So go ahead and subscribe, share with your friends and all that. But also listen to the stereo. From Jonathan, for Jamie and Rory, don't hate, create. Go out there and make some cool stuff, Geekscapists. Bye.